So today what I want to talk to you guys about is this idea of a mindset for success, how to do this thing successfully. And we have a saying in Chinese that is 心态决定状态, which is something along the lines of your mentality determines your reality. So I'm really here to talk about how the way you think about learning Chinese and the way that you have approached it so far might either be really helping you or might actually be harming you, and some ways that we can kind of work past that. So I work here as a lecturer in Chinese in our department. I have taught the class that you're currently in. I have taught the class that you're going to in the fall. I teach the highest level language classes that we offer. So I teach a class in Chinese to English translation. I also teach a class about how the Chinese character system works. And outside of what I do here at GW, I also work for the National Foreign Language Center, which is a research institute at the University of Maryland, where I'm a second language acquisition specialist. So sort of beyond my own experience learning a couple other languages, my research and academic background is in second language acquisition, which is the scientific study of how languages are learned. So I have some opinions about how all of this works and some perceptions of my own, but I also have quite a bit of research and study backing this stuff up too. So the first place I want to start, and this one is really important, maybe it's the most important thing I'm going to say all day, is this idea that perception is reality. And what I mean by that is you have undoubtedly heard before other people say Chinese is hard. You probably say it yourself. People ask you, oh, aren't you taking Chinese? Yeah, how is it? You're probably like, oh, it's so hard. But I want you to stop saying that. If you do nothing else, and you might be sitting there thinking, yeah, sure, right. It's easy for you to say, professor. Like, of course, you don't think Chinese is hard. But it really isn't. Difficult is the wrong word. Really, the way that I want us to perceive the reason that Chinese takes longer to learn if your starting point is English is because Chinese and English are linguistically very distant. That's it. That's the only difference. So English and French are very linguistically close. English is sort of like a Frankenstein monster that's like a little bit of French, a little bit of German, a little bit of Latin. Here's this ugly baby, that's English. English is actually very difficult to learn also. And from the perspective of a linguist, there's no such thing as a language that's harder than another one or easier than another one, sort of absolutely. It's relative, it's distance. So the secret that nobody has told you, but that I'm going to tell you, is that Chinese is really not actually all that hard. And if you don't believe me, history tells us that languages, especially languages with complex writing systems, if they're too hard, they don't make it, they die. What happened to Latin? It's dead. What happened to ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics? They're gone. But Chinese, including this complicated writing system, has survived into modern times, and there must be a reason there. So I would advise you to, think about English, right? Refrigerator. That's not an easy word. It's way easier in Chinese. You think about the months. If you had to teach someone the months of the year in English, how would you teach them? They all end in airy? No, they don't. They all end in what? Nothing. They all begin what way? Nothing. What's the pattern? What's the system? Nothing. Nothing that you can explain. They have to do with the planets, but you don't know that, and you can't explain it to anybody else. But in Chinese, they're much easier. If you want to speak French like I do, you want to say go in French, well, who are you talking about? And when did they do it? And did they do it, or did they only do it in theory and whatever? In Chinese, it's much, much easier, okay? So it's really important to keep in mind that this idea is just relative, that distance, if you want to traverse a greater distance, you have to use more time, but that's it, that it's not any more difficult. And in fact, there are lots of patterns and reasons why Chinese is a lot easier in certain aspects than other languages you might go learn. So my sort of argument for you today is that your mindset is really important. How you approach this, the way that you think about yourself and the way that you think about Chinese and the way that you understand the learning process will have significant impact on how successful you are. And it can be a positive impact, but it can also be a negative impact. So I have 4 pieces of advice as somebody who has successfully done what you think you want to do, which is learn Chinese as a non-native speaker. 4 things that you should do. 1, you need to stop doing this, and you need to stop it soon. And you might sit there and be like, I don't do this. You're lying. I know you do. You might not tell other people that you do it, But you could tell me immediately, if I ask you who's the best Chinese in this class, you know the answer, or you know your perception of the answer. And you probably could give me a rank of where you think you are in the class. How did you get to that conclusion? By comparing yourself to other people. But that's useless. And the reason is because you and others have so many variables that make you independent and distinct from one another that no conclusions can be drawn from this kind of comparison. And even more importantly, if they're good at Chinese, so what? What does that have to do with you? They're good, so therefore you're going to be good? No. They're bad, so therefore what? Nothing. They're good or not good has actually no impact on your ability. And it's kind of like going to the gym. Learning a language is kind of like working out. If all you ever do is think about it, you're not going to get any stronger and you're not going to get any healthier. If you go once a month, you're not going to make much progress. If you go once a week and you work out for 5 hours and then you never go back to the gym for the rest of the week, you're probably not even going to be able to walk, much less, go back to the gym. But when you go to the gym, what you often do is you secretly compare yourself to everybody around you. Or even worse, you feel really self-conscious because you think everybody's judging you, right? They're looking at how you run, they're looking at how much weight you lift. But the thing is, what you don't remember is that everybody else thinks that too. So really what's going on in the gym is just a bunch of anxiety that you're creating yourself because nobody cares about you and they're worried that you care about them. So it would be more beneficial for you to just focus on why you're there and what you want to do, and are you making progress toward your own goals. So when you're tempted to compare yourself to someone else, don't. And you're like, okay, easier said than done, sure. So I'll give you a replacement. Instead, what you should do is compare yourself today to yourself yesterday, last week, last month, last semester, 5 years ago, and determine whether or not you've made progress. Are you better today than you were a week, a month, a year ago? If the answer is yes, congratulations. That's the only worthwhile comparison. And what our job is as your teacher is to support your individual progress. In constraints like a classroom, we have to do it in a room where other people are around, but really actually the only thing that matters is that you progress individually. And that's it. That's our only job. So no comparisons. The next thing I want you to stop doing is telling people how many years you've been learning Chinese, because you're lying to them. And it's not your fault. You're just bad at math. And I'm bad at math too. So, I feel your pain. What's really important is when we think about where we want to go, our goal, our long-term goal, is we have to think realistically about the amount of time we're putting in. We say, I've been learning Chinese for 2 semesters, right? That's what you say. But let's do some math. And I wrote it out because I'm bad at math, right? So if one semester is 16 weeks long, if we assume that you take 50 minutes of Chinese class 4 days a week, which you have a little bit more, but we'll assume it's 50, that's 200 minutes a week, right? If we multiply that by 16 weeks, it's about 53 hours. But we have to take out test days because you're not learning new stuff. We have to take out absences because you missed class. We have to take out spring break, fall break, whatever break in these weeks. We have to take out those moments that you're daydreaming or that you're on Facebook, whatever it is that you young people, listen to me, I sound like my grandma, you use, right? Because you're distracted, you're not paying attention, you're not learning. If we assume that you do your homework, which would be nice, but we can't assume that you do it or you do it focused all the time, you might double the amount of Chinese you do in a week. But if we come back to a semester in total is 2,688 hours, and you do Chinese for 53 hours, that means Chinese occupies less than 2% of your life. So when you ask yourself, how long have you actually been learning Chinese? It hasn't been a semester. It hasn't been a year. It's been like 3 days per semester, right? Divide this by 24. It's been like 2 days and some change in the fall and 2 days and some change in the spring, which actually should be a relief to you. Why? Because think about starting anything from scratch. If you start from scratch and in 3 days, you make as much progress as you've made in Chinese, that's a lot, right? That's something to be excited about and to be proud of. But you give yourself a lot of weird pressure when you say, I've been learning Chinese for 5 years, when you've actually been learning Chinese for like 4.5 days, right? 4 days sounds much better. And people are like, wow, you're this good at Chinese in 4 days. And you're like, yeah. And they're like, oh, that's crazy. And you're not technically lying because they're bad at math, not you now, right? The next thing that's really important is, again, I really don't believe that people come to a language like Chinese for no reason. I think you have a goal. You might not have thought super clearly about it, and that's a problem too, and we'll fix it in a minute. But if you can't explain what your goals are, then it's not that you're never going to make progress towards your goals. It's just that you can't measure your progress. So you're going to feel like you're not making progress. And then you're going to feel really frustrated. You're going to be like, I've been working really hard. I know I'm doing this every day. I'm doing what my teacher says. Why am I not getting better? And it probably isn't that you're not getting better. It's just that you're not measuring it right. So it's important to ask yourself the question, where do you want to be with Chinese by the end of this class, by the end of college, by that moment when you can look at someone else and say, I did it. I made it to wherever it is that I'm trying to get. What does that actually look like? And it's okay, you don't have to, it's not signing a blood contract, right? You don't have to write your goals in stone and then you can never change them again, but you do have to have goals and then update them as that makes sense. So I'm gonna prove to you that you don't know your own goals and that all of your goals are not the same, huh? What I want you to do is reply in the chat to everyone, so make sure everyone else can see it, with two things: the number of the question that I'm going to show you here and your answer. Your answer is probably just going to be yes or no. Question number 1, are you fluent in English, yes or no? It's not a trick question. Oh, there we go. Yes. Okay. I would argue that if you're in college in English, you're probably fluent in English. We'll talk about that in a second, though. Are you fluent in Chinese? Yes or no? No. Okay. No, not at all. Okay, interesting. Do you want to be fluent in Chinese one day? Yes, 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 yes. Okay, fine. Sure. What does that mean? You have 37 seconds. That's it. We don't have a million years. 37 seconds in the chat. Explain it to me as clearly as possible. What does fluent in Chinese mean to you? You only have 30 seconds, so you can't sit there and think for 5 years, huh? What does it mean? And once you're done, I want you to read what other people write. Interesting. So I want you to look at what other people have written. And you're going to notice, undoubtedly, what I notice, which is that you all wrote different stuff. You notice how none of you wrote the exact same thing? There's some similar ideas, but some people say get through every day. Some people say formal topics. Some people say I want to dream in Chinese. Some people say I want to be a diplomat. I want you to understand that those are different, right? I think we can all agree that those are different asks. But what those have in common is the word fluent is a very unclear idea. It means something different to every single one of you, which actually just says to me that it's not a very useful word. It's not a word we should use when we talk about what our goals are because it doesn't mean anything, or it means something different to everyone. So when we think about goals, it's really important to remember that there are different ways to achieve a goal, right? But when we're using the technology of our age to go somewhere we've never been before, we need two pieces of information, right? We need to know, one, where we are, where we're starting from. And two, we need to know before we leave where we're going. Because if we don't know where we're going, we're just going to spend a million years out there lost in the world, right? So instead of using this word fluent, which you can't avoid other people using it, people will ask you once they hear that you're learning another language, are you fluent in Chinese yet? And you can be like me and just roll your eyes because fluent is the only F word, okay? This is the worst one of all of the F words. Those other ones are okay, but this one, we're going to stop using this word. Because fluent is a technical term. The way that language teachers use it, it's a technical term. It's a linguistics term. And all that it means is speaking without inappropriate pauses or hesitations. It doesn't mean at what level of language ability you speak. It just means you don't, talk like this. That's what it means. That's disfluent speech. It has nothing to do with your level. So other people are going to use this word, but when you think about your language abilities, where you are and where you want to be, you shouldn't. You should use a different word. which I'll tell you in a second. Because the idea is you can't get very far if you can't see where you're going or see where you want to end up, right? Which one of these roads would you feel more comfortable on? I know for me, it would be this one, because who knows what's standing down there in the fog. So when you think about your end game, it's important that you think about, do you want to be able to use Chinese to meet your basic needs, like have a conversation with someone while you're traveling, like at a restaurant or at a pharmacy? Are you trying to make really deep connections with people, like your family members or new friends that you meet? Are you trying to use Chinese professionally in a government job versus in a business setting? Because while they're both professional, the skills required are completely different. Are you trying to use Chinese as comfortably as you use English? In other words, you want to be able to be yourself and not feel dumb every time you speak Chinese. My aunt, who's from Peru, I grew up speaking Spanish, and she used to say to me all the time as a kid, I wish people knew how smart I was in English as I am when I speak Spanish, right? That frustration of you can't quite, there's something blocking you from being you, right? And feeling comfortable. Or is it something else? Because the word we want to use is proficient or proficiency. And the way you should think about your goals in language learning is what I can do right now, or what I can't do right now that I want to be able to do is what? And the more specific you can be, the better. And while you're on your way to your goal, my last piece of advice here is that it's really important that you focus on the positive, that you focus on what you can do, not what you can't do, because progress is progress. Any progress is a good thing, and you should be excited and happy and praised because you made any progress at all, because there's always more to learn. All of you said very confidently, I'm fluent in English. Yeah, I bet you don't know what uxorious means. I bet you can't even spell it without spell check. You definitely don't know what it means, but that's English. I thought you were fluent in English. Oh, right. There's more to learn. There's always more to learn, right? No Chinese person would tell you seriously that they know all of Chinese either. And if they did, send them to me and I'll give them a quiz, and I promise you that they will leave there crying. So this idea of language proficiency, the reason that we show language proficiency or ability growth using this kind of an image instead of using something like a mountain, I tell my students, don't think about language learning like climbing a mountain. Why? Because when you climb a mountain, you eventually get to the peak. And what happens when you get there? It's only downhill from here. That sucks. Just like when you're going to hear people, you're in college now, you're going to hear people say, college was the best 4 years of my life. That's a scary thing to say to somebody. I'm like, really? That's it? This is it? This is the best I can ever be? I hope not. So we think of language proficiency in terms of you start at 0 and you grow, but you don't just grow up, you also grow out. In other words, the amount of information that you can talk about, that you can handle, it grows by level, but it also grows sort of by width and by depth. But what that means is that anything from 0, anything above 0 is good. That means, wow, look, you did something. You can do something and it's not 0. So any functional proficiency at all should be rewarded. And then it's important, as you're going to think one day about how you're going to use this language professionally or whatever, that you can explain, you can define your proficiency, both in terms of your current ability and in terms of what you want to get to in the future, in terms of these words sort of that everybody in our field uses. Because when people say, oh, are you fluent in Chinese? And you can turn around and say, well, right now I have an advanced mid proficiency. That means something, whereas fluent in Chinese doesn't mean anything or means different things to different people. So that was like rapid fire. I only have 20 minutes to talk to you. So I'm giving you sort of a condensed version of something I normally spend a whole class with students on. What I want you to do for the next 25 seconds is see if you can remember, without looking at your notes if you just took notes, what are the 4 things that I just told you? What are those 4? What are the 4 pieces of advice? Take 22 seconds. You don't have to write them anywhere. Just can you recall them in your head? Take 5 more seconds. Let's see how many you can remember. So again, number 1, no more comparisons, right? Let's get rid of that nonsense. Only comparing yourself to yourself. Instead of talking about years and semesters, it's important that you at least keep track more or less of how many hours you're dedicating to Chinese, a week, a month, or whatever, because if you see that your progress is slowing, you want to ask yourself, how hard have I been working at this, right? Because we all have lots of priorities. You're not in college to just learn Chinese, and we're not dumb. We don't pretend that you are, right? Remember, you can't achieve a goal you can't name. If you can't define the goal clearly, you're never going to get there, and you're going to quit because you feel frustrated. And then finally, it's really important to always think about what you can do, because there's always more to learn. Nobody's going to assume they're going to listen to you speak Chinese for 2.5 seconds and go, oh yeah, you have more to learn. So what? Duh, you're learning Chinese. You're not a native Chinese speaker, right? Who cares? So what I want you to think about, I'm going to give you an assignment here. It's obviously not for a grade, but something that I truly hope you spend a couple minutes doing. But before that, what I want you to think about is, which one of these do you need to work on the most right now? Which one of these do you struggle with the most? Do you have clear goals? Can you name them? Do you normally get mad at yourself like, oh, when am I going to be good at Chinese? Because that's not a great, useful attitude. Are you constantly comparing yourself to other people in your class and nervous when you're going to talk in front of a group? Because guess what? When you're nervous and you don't talk, you don't practice. And when you don't practice, you don't get better. And it's this negative cycle of you're never going to get better, right? So where do we go from here? The two things that I would love for you to do this weekend that I think will really set you up for success moving beyond this semester, which is basically over, is number one, I really want you to read this document, and I sent it to Zhang Lao so she can share it with you, and determine where you are right now. These are those proficiency levels. Of course, you don't have to read it on this piece of paper. And these are the different ways we define language skills. So we talk about interpersonal communication, which is the ability to talk to somebody else spontaneously. We talk about presentational speaking, which is speaking with preparation. We talk about presentational writing, which is writing with preparation, right? Because those things are different. It's different when you can prepare versus you have to do it off the top of your head. Then we talk about listening and reading. And those are pretty straightforward. So I want you to think about, where are you right now? You might realize that, oh, in this skill I'm here, in this one I'm over here, in this one I'm here, whatever. And then I want you to think about, where do you want to be? By the end of college, 4 years from now, where do you want to be in Chinese? Especially if you're thinking, I want to get out of college and use this in any kind of a professional capacity. You have to understand that if you're not at least in that advanced range somewhere, ain't nobody hiring you. And the reason is because they can find somebody who has that proficiency, or your proficiency is just not sufficient for the job that they need. And let me tell you, if you're interested in the government, I know for a fact, because I work with the government quite often in my own projects, that they need people with high-level Chinese proficiency desperately. That those jobs are literally just sitting there with people who suck at Chinese right now because they don't have the people. But if you don't have the right proficiency, they're not going to give you the job. And then I want you to think, if you think your goal for college is not sort of the end of the road for you, think about where you want to be after college and what that means, right? Does that mean you're going to go live in a Chinese-speaking place? Does it mean you're going to keep learning beyond college, right? And that's the big picture. So that is sort of my pitch for the day. It's really important, again, to think about where you are before you're able to determine where you want to be and how long you have to spend to get there. And if you have any questions, please do feel free. I'll stick around for a couple of minutes. We can talk, but also do feel free to reach out. My emails are always open.